right, cool. So we are back for part two of the convo. And it just seemed like this setting would be better for the stuff that we're talking about because, it's like tensions are high, people want to figure out what's going on and why all of these racist attacks are happening. And, it's like I get why Oprah does hers, not to say that I'm Oprah, but
Uh,
I get why I get why she does it. Like some things she'll do in front of an audience and some things she won't. And for this conversation, it felt like it would be better to just have the two of us this time. How you doing?
I'm okay. How are you? You look good.
Thank you. I was like, let me put on my curly look and my uppity shirt because
Yes.
even having this conversation is could be considered uppity by some, but we don't care. Let's just dive into it. So you and I, like offline, have had some great conversations about the
Everything.
racial tension between our two ethnic groups.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about something you said that I've not been able to get out of my mind, where we were talking about how our particular racial identities see ourselves in the scope of power,
Yeah.
worldwide power. So, what I had said was, in my view, it's Black people, then Latin people, then uh, Asian people, then white women, then white men. And you countered with,
Well, I had said I can imagine that there are some Asian people that feel like they're at the bottom of the totem pole at this point in history, which I know was shocking. And I don't, and it's important for me to put like a preface to this conversation to say that I don't speak for anybody. I don't speak for
absolutely.
a lot of people. I don't speak for most people. And also lately, I've been also bringing into every conversation that I have about racism and anti-Asian hate, just so it's here that for me, when I speak, I'm never speaking without acknowledging the racism that the Black community has gone through, and that there is no comparison to what the Black community has gone through, and we as Asian American folks need to stand in solidarity with the Black community and not and check our anti-Black tendencies when we're talking about the Asian American hate crimes. That's just my blanket statement. I like to start every conversation because I think it's important. We talk about there's many conversations where they say we're in Lenape land, doing the Native American land acknowledgements, and also talking about our pronouns, mine are she, her, hers. This is just one extra thing that I think is important when we have these kinds of conversations. So putting
Mhm.
that out there. Thank you for giving me the time to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, jumping back in, I believe that I think it's been seeming to me when I've been in conversations and about where Asians are feeling what they feel, there's been a kind of disenfranchisement about the lack of visibility and just the lack of being able to speak. I think we look to the Black community, whether you are someone that has done your work and says, okay, the Black community is my brothers and sisters, or you're a person that has a lot to do dismantling your anti-Blackness as an Asian person. I think we look to the Black community and say, wow, you can speak out and you are heard. Like, I think a lot of times we go, oh, you would never go up to a Black person and do this, and that has been a barometer for a lot of Asian people, saying, oh, you would never go up to a Black person and do this, so why are you doing it to an Asian? And
Mm.
I think that, to me, has a specific worth in the eyes of an Asian person.
Mhm.
um it's so hard because I'm just like, I don't want to speak for everybody, and it's hard to just
Well,
keep having
yeah.
this conversation, like.
Let's put that all out of our minds because when I speak, I usually get at least minimum one message where it's like, you don't speak for me. And I'm like, I hear you.
I'm
I
about to
can't
get so
speak.
much backlash for this conversation right here, and I'm freaking out. So this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that's why we're doing this, and you're my friend. And I'm
yeah,
grateful for this space. And so
absolutely. And the thing is, and also I misspoke, just going back because this is going to bother me. Black and Native American are on the same level. I neglected to mention Native Americans, and that's my bad. That's a blind spot I have. And I'm trying to do the work for that. But that being said, on one hand, no, I can't speak for all of Black America, but I can speak for some of Black America. And maybe something I say will resonate, but to not have the conversations, I think is a tool of the oppressor, where it's basically like, well, no, if you don't speak for everybody, then you can't speak at all. And it's
you don't
like,
have
no,
a voice.
exactly. Your voice is very valid. So yes, you are not speaking for the whole Asian population or biracial Asian people. We are just having a conversation based on the things that we have noticed and picked up on from our groups that we identify with.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Along those lines, um, so one, I couldn't, it was interesting because when you said that, I was like, but how? How can some Asian Americans think that they are at the bottom when Black people can literally be killed by the police and nobody will pay a penalty
I'll
unless
tell
you go
you.
to the streets?
I'll tell you how. And this is, I've been thinking about this a lot, and
Yeah.
it's about the lack of information and the erasure of history of all BIPOC in America. This,
Okay.
this is a thing I've been thinking about
Mhm.
because for me, I've been, for the past few years, I've been listening to the Black community and saying, oh, well, if they are saying this is happening, then this is happening. But I have grown up with the narrative that has been fed to me about who Black people are in society, whether or not I have these relationships. The anti-Blackness that we have grown up with and been steeped in has been like, oh, this is what Black people, this is their story. It wasn't until I saw the 13th
Mhm.
that I was like, I was so livid about the stories that the narrative that I've been told about Black people,
Yeah.
and this idea that the wealth has been taken and the opportunities have been taken, and equality and equity are not the same thing. I was so livid. And this is the same reaction I had when I found out that I wasn't taught about the Japanese internment in high school. I had to read a book about it in my 20s.
Mhm.
So and I'm reading, I make a point to go to, I'm on social media a lot because I feel like that's where you can have access to different perspectives,
Yeah.
which is kind of a joke because I recognize we're in a bubble and we see things in our algorithms. But on
Yeah.
Instagram, which is where I spend a lot of my time, and which is where unapologetically Asian and racism is a virus is, I spend a lot of time reading every comment, even the ones that make me
Mm.
sick to my stomach. I follow all sorts of different people. I follow problematic people. I follow popular people. I follow
Yeah.
all different kinds of walks of life because I just want to see what people are saying in the comments. And we had a conversation where, like, you can't believe the people are who are just casually still thinking the things they think, like, and they'll just put it out there and just be like, oh no, it's because Black people are this, or like Asian people are that, or an Asian person will say something really problematic about Asians in general. I'm like, well, oh, do you not realize that you have not broken out of the stuff that you've been fed, the
Yeah.
narrative you've been fed? So I definitely think that there is a whole misconception of people's experiences going on, that had they known, I'm gonna throw my mother under the bus here, but like I've had conversations with her. I'm like, she'll say one thing and I'm like, do you realize that you only have part of the story? Like,
Mm.
this is not the full picture. You need to
Mhm.
look at the full picture of what's been going on, and you need to figure out, you need to realize who has been in control of the narrative, who lives, who dies, who tells your story. It's reverberated through our entire country for that reason. Lin-Manuel wrote that, who lives, who dies, who tells your story. It is so important. And
Yeah.
he hooked into it, and that's the truth. We have to relearn history through different
Absolutely.
classes, take off
Absolutely.
classes we've been given.
And I think that to because I saw Sean King had a great post where he was pushing back on people saying that Asian people are not speaking out for Black people.
I saw.
However, I do think it's an important conversation to have. And while I liked Sean's responses, I think that it's irresponsible to ignore the fact that we've been on polarizing, we've been on opposite sides of the spectrum largely, and we haven't had this type of conversation. And it's, as I've been thinking about it, it's fascinating that we're, both of our groups are being distracted and forgetting that it's all white supremacy at the top, right? So I think that if there's any marginalized group that is not willing to do the work and to stand in solidarity with other people that are being oppressed, you are upholding white supremacy. And I do think there, I keep coming back to it. When Daniel Watts said it, it just blew my mind that Black men also tend to uphold white supremacy because they have a little bit of privilege. So it's like at the expense of Black women who pretty much the privilege I have is being straight. That's it, you know. And Christian, if that counts, but I don't even call myself anyway. It's, he was talking about how there have been times where he's realized that he has not um, been as much of an ally, a protector of Black women because he's trying to hold on to that little bit of privilege, and white women do the same thing. And I would open that up into saying that non-Black, non-Native American ethnic minorities are also in this space of not speaking out against oppression because of the fear their privilege or protection will be taken away. Does that resonate?
It does. This is definitely something that the Asian community I have seen firsthand have been working on. There are entire groups of people that I know who are speaking out, and I got distracted because I was thinking about how it's interesting because there's so many Asians that are so bent on proving that they're not anti-black that they will only speak out about, they're like, we have to dismantle our anti-blackness, but then also not speaking out about this stuff that's happening in the Asian community because they're seeing that as very
Mhm.
problematic. They're like, well, how can we talk about what's going on with Asian people when we don't, like we're actually all anti-black. And that is a very, you know, problematic way of looking at things because the way I see it, and this is not the point of what you originally asked, but I'm going to make my way back
Mhm.
to that.
Yeah.
But, the problem with that is that if you're only speaking out for what you see is palatable to other people right now and not speaking about what's going on with you when there's an actual need, then that's performative too. That's performative allyship. And so if you can't talk about what's going on with you, how is your allyship worth something when you stand with other communities?
Mm.
So yeah, there's entire groups of Asians who are still reticent to talk about what's going on with the Asian community.
Mhm.
You know, this has been something we have changed so much, the Asian community. I have, to me, in my perspective, that I've seen happen within the span of a year. What was happening last year, and my whole impetus of my desire to spread around the idea of racism as a virus, the hashtag campaign for specifically for Asian Americans, was to just get them to just say, "Hey, I'm going to use my voice to say this is not okay," because classically how our community is just, we're just taught to bear things stoically. We are taught silence is golden. We're taught it's partially cultural from like our parents countries, and also just um there's other factors that go into it that I'm just learning about, so I don't feel I can speak out
Mhm.
about. But I think it has to do with the model minority myth. It's like that was fed to us in the 70s, 80s, 90s, to that aughts, where like, oh well, you're minorities, but you're successful and you're doing this, and this is how you're supposed to be. And so it became like, oh, well, that was the wedge that they were putting between, that the system known as white supremacy put between our communities. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
you're the ones that are like this. And within the Asian community, we say this, people say this over and over again, and it becomes like you don't even know what it means anymore. We are not a monolith, meaning
Yeah.
that we run the gamut from very dark brown to very porcelain skinned, and we run the gamut from having been um, coming from countries who've been colonized for
Mhm.
many many years to having being superpowers. So it's hard it's hard to say one experience is the same, and so there's going to be Asians that you're going to find are going to have different relationships to their privilege, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So I'm such a non-linear girl, coming right back around the bend, and thank you for your patience with this,
Yeah.
coming back around the bend to what whether Asian Americans have been speaking out for Black people. It has been a huge point of contention in our community, and I think that people are doing a good job of it. And I hope that the Black community will be able to start to feel this. And if you're not feeling it, um, then that's really shitty. And clearly, there's more work to do. But
Mhm.
from what I'm seeing, and in the organizations that I run, Racism is Virus and Unapologetically Asian, and the people that I come into contact with online,
Mhm.
um, that are Asian communities, I feel like everyone's been making a very concerted effort to
Mhm.
put forward that it's imperative to stand with the Black community, and that we have to say this, and we cannot make it just about us, or not about nothing at all.
Yeah.
And there are still Asian folks who they're catching up to it, or they're just not there.
Yeah.
They're just
Yeah.
not going
Yeah.
to be able to do it because they have been not able to use their own voice for so long.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that is the problem, is that Asian people have been, they don't want to speak up, they don't want to rock the boat. It's also just uncomfortable culturally.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's just uncomfortable to speak
Yeah.
about these kinds of things.
Yeah.
There's a different way of dealing with things, and so um it's going to take a minute, I think, before you find across the board that every Asian person you meet will be like, oh yes, this is what we do. But I want to say, like, I've just been really proud of the Asian community for taking the time to print pamphlets, to talk to parents about BLM. Like,
Yeah.
it was a thing, like there were
Yeah.
pamphlets printed that were translated into every Asian language so that we could bring it to our families to have the conversations. And that's the information that we were sharing as well. That's the information that we were trying to get out. um, I personally have had so many people, strangers even, come up to me and say, like, how do I talk to my family about this? And
Yeah.
um, there was this one website, and my memory has gone to complete shits. These times I literally take something called Agile Mind because I'm getting old.
And
But
it's
it
right
was
now.
yeah, it's a website called, and people watching this will know and hopefully put in the comments. Um, it was a website about talking to your parents about Black Lives
Wow.
Matter,
If
translated into
you
all these different languages.
if you find that,
Yeah,
can you post it and I will repost it as well because
yeah.
I think this is information I didn't have
I love that.
and
Glad we're
I
talking.
have seen the work and I will say I think that for I love that when we're talking offline, it's like my mind is free to do all the things that your mind is also doing. So I had a few thoughts. One, I think that we would be remiss to like you touched on to not acknowledge that every ethnic group is a spectrum and people with black skin, we have Afro Latinas, we have first gen from African countries, we have Caribbean Americans. So it's also the model immigrant myth that is within the black community in America that's tricky. So it's like I get it when you're talking about like the different layers where different people are at. And I do think that we collectively need to have grace for when people get on the bus and finally learn how to use their voices. Like I have to that's something that I felt like God was reminding me when I started having these conversations, was that there are a lot of people out there who just don't have the courage to start, and some people need permission from a trusted face to start having the conversations. Now, should it be that way? No, but also I'm a human being, and I have a lot of friends from my hometown who I know love me, but also are like, one, we didn't know you were going through this, and two, we don't even know what to do with it because this has not been our experience. So I think that as Asian Americans are waking up to the power that you have as a community to use your voices, I want to encourage the Black community to be like, all right, well, welcome, come on. You, because it's like, I
Something.
feel like we're past the point of saying like, where have you been? It's like, okay, we have that. We've had that discussion. I feel like these debates have been happening and the conversations are being had. Like, I'm still floored that flyers are printed and translated so that you can talk. Like, that makes me a little emotional because
I'm emotional right now,
I
Z.
know.
I'm emotional with what you're saying to me, saying like, okay, like I don't know, just we talked about this, you and I, about like this is such a heavy conversation that you and I coming into this, even though we have a connection and we understand we're avatars in a way, even as much as we're like we don't represent anybody, but there's something that we're connected to this greater the greater parts of our community energetically, and you saying those words to me heal me on a level bigger than myself. When you said, okay, I'm happy to hear these things, thank you, there's something in me that feels like, even though I already know person to person we're there, there's just something bigger than that. So
Well,
thank you.
I see the work and I see the people who are not doing the work. And I want to affirm what you're doing because it is important. And I think that it's one thing to hear the valid complaints and to say, okay, we hear you, and now there's a response that's happening. So we need to acknowledge that so that we can move forward together because we've got to stop doing this. It's not helpful, but I think it's also helpful to understand where the other side is coming from, because I remember when we were privately talking and you were talking about some of the oppression that Asian Americans face, and I remembered saying, and again, not speaking for the whole Black community, but I was like, I mean, we just want to be treated as human beings. We just want to be able to live. Like, it's not taking anything away from the horrible things that have been done historically, but I do think that acknowledging uh, the different shades of struggle. Like, I will never know what it's like to be a white woman and to be underestimated and have to fight for the right to work. I don't know what that is because my people were brought here to work, and I wish. Sometimes I'm like, my gosh, what's that like to
Yeah.
have people be so protective of you that they literally cradle you like you're this little porcelain doll. And meanwhile, for Black women, it's like, you'll be fine. You're fine. You're strong. And it's like, we're strong because we have had no other choice. I would love to be seen as a delicate flower. I would love it. But unfortunately, that's not what America is. And when the Black community, it's almost like we're skilled in speaking out because we've had to. We've had no other way. So I want it to be, I don't want you, I don't want the Asian community to feel like they're being ignored in favor of Black voices. It's literally just that we've been doing this for a long time, and we've had models of people to follow who have already been doing this. So my hope is that this new generation that is speaking up, you guys will be the blueprint for the next generation so it won't be starting from scratch.
That's I'm getting chills thinking about that. And I think I've heard so many folks talk about healing generational trauma
Ooh,
and not wanting to carry it into the next generation. And there's something I think about this a lot, and it's been important in my own personal life. I went through some health stuff, and my only way out of the health stuff was actually healing generational trauma.
Mm,
And so I think we're all being called to do this right now. We're all being called to say, like, this great pause that we were all forced into. Like, we've all had to look at some really hard stuff, personally, family, career on large scales. And now this has been a gift that we're having to have this conversation as Americans. Like, are we going to fucking deal with the racism? Are we going to finally talk about it? And
yeah,
it's been hard, but it's been such a relief to not have to. And this is me even speaking as a biracial asian asian and half white woman. Like, I don't have to pretend that I don't deal with the shit that I'm dealing with anymore. Like, the Me Too movement had kind of started that for me as a woman, and then now I can be like, you know what, Broadway is racist. I had some really hard racist things, and I know the privilege I have. I cannot imagine being someone with a darker skin tone having to deal with this exponentially.
yeah, yeah.
And there is kind of a relief in being able to finally talk about it. And hopefully, I'm a teacher. I have a lot of Gen Z students, and the things that they say and how they go about things, I have hope.
Yeah,
I have hope. They
yes.
care. They're sensitive to many
Mhm.
different dimensions of things. They look at things from all sides. I just wish them peace, because that's hard too. Like,
It is. It is, but I'm excited that they're doing it at a younger age so that they won't have the people pleasing codependency that maybe not to the same level. Because I think for me, that was one of the biggest things when I started speaking out was, oh gosh, okay. I knew not I knew not all of my family was going to be on board. I knew my parents' concern was only for my safety and still is. They're concerned about my safety. They're concerned about whether or not I'm going to be able to ever work on Broadway again or in TV. And, the thing is, these are valid concerns. Absolutely. However, I feel like as a child of two people who lived through segregation, um, who wanted to speak out, but it was far more dangerous. I said to them the other day, ooh, getting choked up a little bit, but I was
I'm
like,
feeling.
my ancestors could not do all of the things that I'm able to do. I have a wall in my living room, and it's just pictures of as far back as I could go. Because a lot of the records of the people that were enslaved were burned, right? Um, but I have back to my great grandfather, I want to say. And it's like when I think of the things that I have the privilege to say, the fact that I can use my voice and that change can happen, even if it's on a micro level, that is change that they would not have been able to do. Like the Klan literally went through my dad's house when he was little, looking for my uncle. My dad had experiences where he was followed by racists because there was a very light skinned girl that he was walking home with, and they thought she was white. Like, can you even imagine what that does
No,
to you? What that does to
your soul.
your
Your
soul, your feeling of safety, your feeling of ownership over your right to the American dream. And it's not saying that America is perfect, but I am saying that I recognize that it's one of those for such a time as this moments. Like we have the platforms. I look at part of the reason I moved to LA was because I saw what Issa Rae was doing. I saw what Blackish was doing. I was like, oh, the Black suburban story. They're not doing that on Broadway. Well, they did in Stick Fly, but you know what I mean? That was the exception. It's not the rule. So I was like, let me come out here. And I think that the invention of social media has really empowered our marginalized groups to see, oh my gosh, we're not alone. Our voices have power. And if we raise our voices together, they have to pay attention.
That's right.
They have to. So if we start to if we stop seeing each other as the enemy, if we stop seeing it in terms of lack and say, oh, wait, actually, there's one structure that has us all distracted. It's like the puppet master of white supremacy. And our strings are getting tangled in each other. And we're so busy like trying to figure out, well, why are you pulling on my string? You have more string. Instead of looking up and be like, oh, that's what it is. We need to work together and get rid of that.
Very well said. I could not have said that any better. That's it. And people, it's so funny that I see, and right now, a lot of my conversations where I'm seeing these are on threads that I'll say, hey, this is based from what this is happening from the system known as white supremacy. This isn't about like, and I got into this long argument with these two Asians on this one group about how the Black people need to be kept accountable. I was like, good God, like, no, like, do you not see that this all comes from the same system known as white supremacy? Because it's about pitting us against each other. So I had a friend that said this, and I don't know if this is going to feel intense, but like, there a lot of there's been crimes against BIPOC to BIPOC, right?
Yep.
And you look at this, and I think this is where the conversation about the totem pole came from, not in terms of suffering, but in terms of like who has more like who's most vulnerable. Asian grandparents, right? And if this is human nature, that people who need to, and God, I'm just going to speak for myself because I'm the eldest child,
Mm.
and I would take shit out of my brothers all the time because they were less powerful than me and I was bigger than them. And that's the only kind of like real life experience that I can say. Like, when people feel like you can, if you're upset and you're trying to deal with your stuff and you can't take it out on the people that you want to take it down on, the adults or whatever, you're going to take it out on people who you view to be more vulnerable or who won't fight back.
Yeah.
And so that to me, I think was where the totem pole comment came from. And I also think it's like the wrong way to even talk about it and look at it. And when we had that conversation, I was also so shook by it, and I was just so like, like just feeling for everything you said to me that day. And I was just like, I just felt so hopeless. I just felt like, why? What can we even do?
But we're doing it, girl. We're doing like like the amount of people that tuned in that DM'd me that are excited to watch part two. It fills me with hope because it's like I'm not even looking at the metrics of how many people watch. I want to know who was touched, who was challenged,
Yeah.
who learned. And as long as one person learned something, then that's a success. Then that fills me with hope
Yeah.
because it shows that people are not shut down. It's sometimes we have to like start in the mess and like work our way through the conversation to see like, okay, well, what are we even trying to do? And then once we figure that out, okay, so how do we put the plan into action? And my goal for talking to you was just just to start talking about it because we don't talk about it. We don't talk about I think I'm still I can't get out of the fact that I'm stuck on the talking to the parents and the grandparents about Black Lives Matter because I do think that we have to, just like I'm recognizing that my parents had a whole different experience. I will never know what it's like to grow up in the segregated South, and I cannot judge them for how they respond to certain things. However, I can teach them lovingly about new things while respecting them, respecting their experience, but also ushering them into a new way of looking at things. Because also, as I see my parents age, it's got to be terrifying to go from being a robust adult to starting to shrink and not being able to like respond as quickly and seeing how people start to coddle you. It's got to be terrifying. So when I see these attacks on Asian grandparents, I'm like, Are you serious? Like it makes me infuriated. It makes me frustrated. I know I just went on a
No,
tangent.
I know, and I was with you the entire way. So
You
I thank
know,
you.
it's like I think that as we have these conversations with our elders, hopefully things will start to change so that the things that we always used to feel from certain people groups will start to shift. Um, and that also I want to empower. I mean, you're looking at the work that some of the organizations in the Asian community have done over the past year. It's very impressive. It really is, because to go from being culturally told to not use your voices and to being like, no, screw that. We have to speak up. I just want to encourage you to keep going, because that's literally what it is. You know, look at any civil rights movement, look at any kind of movement toward equality, and you'll always have the people that started that have to go through the most, you know, the most fear, because they are the first. But you have to keep pushing through this. I just want to encourage you. We're not going to solve all the world's problems, but I do think that um, we need to keep checking in, um, community to community, saying, how can I help? I am speaking out against these attacks. They're horrific. They're absolutely horrific. And they're also a symptom of a larger problem. So, how do we empower people to use their voices? Like, I just wanted to put that to you. Like, how are you encouraging the Asian community to step back from those cultural guidelines? And I know we have to, I'm keeping an eye on the time.
Oh yes. Oh my God, time just flew,
I
man.
know.
I think, you know, there's so many things that can be done that are being done. People really are stepping up. They're everyone's encouraged to, you know, it's that whole New York, if you see something, say something.
Yeah.
Um, Also to kind of stay safe, but not I literally have friends that I think that you know who are mutual friends of yours who they were sitting on a park bench in Central Park and had a rock the size of someone's palm thrown at them in Central Park, and that could have, you know, just even that energy coming at you alone, where someone wanted to throw a rock at you, like the image of women being stoned is a very like
Yep.
just having that metaphor thrown at you. You don't need to be injured to feel that impact.
Yeah.
And so it's about staying safe and staying vigilant, but also like spreading it around and making it making it heard. Like share your stories. You know, our initial campaign with Racism as a Virus, that was one, it had a very singular goal. It was just to get Asians to speak out, Asians and allies to start speaking out. That is happening, thank God. You know, the next couple of things that we try to do is we pass around petitions to get media coverage of these things, because that was a thing. People were like, oh yeah, this is just whatever, this isn't really happening. Just but the acknowledgement that this is happening is important. I think it's, for the Asian community, it's important to just keep talking about it and examine why we haven't talked about it in the past, and then examining what is this thing about the model minority myth, you know, because there's so many implications, like going back to the whole idea of like why do Asians feel, what's the rift, like what's the issue, it's this model minority thing. It's like, and we all have to dismantle it ourselves. Like it's like this is not real.
Hmm.
We have to figure out like what makes this, like
Yeah.
what beliefs have been implanted in us that aren't even ours, that
Hmm.
we've been living with,
Yeah.
that we have to, that we're different somehow from the Black community, um we're not discriminated against in our own way. Like, you know, everybody, there's systemic racism, and all different members of the BIPOC community have different ways that white supremacy, depending on the history, has used that as a method of control.
Hmm.
um so I think it's just about continuing to encourage folks to share their stories. I know for me, the Me Too movement was healing for me. Like I walk around differently as a human being. And if we all walk around with that weight of shame lifted off of us because we can talk and say the hard things. And this is Brene Brown. Like God love Brene Brown. I read her one summer and just like laid in bed crying and journaling for hours, like 17 pages. But it was a huge relief of being like, oh, the opposite of shame is sharing and connection. And that's what we have to do to move forward. It has to be done. You know, it's going to be hard. And this conversation, I was so nervous for it, you know, even though we've been talking like I love you. And it's, I was just like, okay, what are we going to say, you know, and just trusting that moving like you said, I just was like, okay, you know, I trust Zakia, like we're just gonna talk and we're gonna muddle our way through it and know that we're not gonna get certain things right, and that we just need to keep sharing our stories. That just seems very foundational to me. Like share it on social media, share it with each other. Like when my friends just talked about the rock that was thrown at them, they received so much community support, and that allows them to kind of like walk through life and be good, but also for other people to be like, this is happening, she's just Asian sitting on you know, like sitting on a park bench and having something thrown at her. And then, you know, and then I'm just going to add to this is probably non-linear, but to like listen to Black friend stories, listen to Native American stories, listen to your Latino friends stories. Like I have one of my best friends is Mexican American, and he says he's taught me so much about like, no, this is really shitty for the Latin community. And I hadn't thought about things in that way before. And you know, there's a part of me, you know, I have like Spanish ancestors. I walk down the street being spoken, like I'm not so far from the Latin community, you know, and even then I just didn't understand how things impacted how they were feeling. And I was like, okay, so we listen to our friends, uplift their stories, share. There's room, you know, like there's room on social media.
And that's the thing. Communication is the way that white supremacy, blocking communication is the way that white supremacy was able to take root. When you keep people of color marginalized and when you take away
Their voice.
their methods of communication, then you feel isolated and alone, right? That's how cults work.
Yeah.
You know, so we need to have another one of these, because I want to check in and just see what's new. And again, if we don't know what the other group is going through, then we're never going to get anywhere because we all have the same goal in mind. But before we wrap, I
Yeah.
do want to talk about there was something that was forgotten in our first session, and I wanted to clear it up. So there was someone else that was involved. Can you talk to me a little bit about the AEA mixed race performances?
Yes, I wanted to say that there's when we were speaking about the mixed race mixers that we were talking about, I mentioned it was something I did. I had a co organizer with that. Her name is Alex Chester, and she's been doing amazing work with her magazine and organization Hoppa Mag. She When we were speaking, it was just in conversation. I wasn't thinking about, we were just trying to get through the conversation. I wasn't thinking about properly crediting. That was my fault. Alex has done amazing work. Please go follow her and follow Hoppa Mag for the work she's doing there. So that
Thank
helps.
you. Yeah, absolutely. And for people who don't know, because I don't, what does HAPA stand for?
It's the Hawaiian word for mixed race that has been previously, a lot of people have it's been a derogatory term for mixed race folks. This has been a way for mixed race people to reclaim this word as something beautiful, and I identify as Hapa. I love being mixed race, and I think what they're doing is just beautiful. So
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's wrap. But we're going to do this again. Thank you for having the convo, and we will talk soon.
indeed.